All right, greetings of peace, everybody. My name is Reza Nekumanesh, and I am honored to be serving as the clergy organizing director for this amazing network called Faith in Action. I'm really happy to be here tonight. First of all, with uh, my co-creators of this space, Rabbi Jonathan and Reverend Gould, but with each and every one of you from wherever you hail from, I'm just appreciative that each of you were able to join us tonight. So the question, why are we here? Before I let my co-creators introduce themselves, why are we here? We're here together to think through our different traditions in a way that allows us to have what we call uncomfortable conversations, conversations that give life. And we'll get deeper into that later. But first, I want to share this also comes because we understand that for us to truly build community, for us to truly build power, for us to truly build relationships that are long-standing, that are powerful, that are going to move the needle the way we need it to move, we're going to have to understand and see in each other ourselves. We go back to around like 8 months ago, where we started having conversations around voting and knocking on doors. And what did it mean to knock on doors in a way that was seeing the person on the other side of the door, not just as somebody that we could check off a box, fill in a couple pieces of information and move on, but how do we knock on doors in a way that we actually see the person, engage the person, and begin to build a relationship with the person? So using the structure and the idea of I and thou from Martin Buber. And I know many of you have read the beautiful work of Martin Buber, I and thou, and it's been used by so many people to understand the way that they think about God, the way they think about self, the way they think about others. One of the great scholars and activists that used that was Dr. Martin Luther King multiple times. In his letter to the Birmingham jail, he talked about the I and thou relationship, and in a sermon he talked about the I and thou relationship when he said that I cannot reach fulfillment of I without the thou, right? Without you, without seeing you for who you are, without seeing you fully as a human, as a creation of God, that I have a problem even getting to where I need to be personally. And because we started thinking like that, because we started having those conversations, we got to a couple hiccups. And those hiccups came in so many spaces where we are sitting in a multi-faith space or an interfaith space or a multicultural space, whatever it may be, and we hear a brilliant scholar or a brilliant religious leader or an elder stand up and say something like, we all believe that, dot, 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 right? We all believe that, dot, dot, dot. And the reality is that we all don't believe. We have a variety of beliefs. We have different expressions of beliefs, and we're not all the same. It happens often that I sit in spaces where I hear something along the lines of, we all believe that we're the children of God. And it's a beautiful idea, but I don't believe that. As a Muslim, that's not part of who I am. So I choose one of two things. I either hide and I just say, well, I have my own verse that I can deal with, and I kind of just deal with it, or we have those uncomfortable conversations where we say, pause, I respect you for everything that you are. I love what you bring. I love you, but we don't all agree. And that's not the only time that that happens. I know that you find those spaces oftentimes, not even in multi-faith, even just intra-faith. You can be amongst people that are within your own faith tradition that is your experience. So that's why we're here today, to think about these uncomfortable conversations and to think about our religious traditions that give us pause. A Muslim scholar at UCLA, Khalid Abul Fadl, he talks about a conscientious pause, where when you are reading something even if it's your holy text, or you're watching something, or you're listening to a sermon and something gives you pause, something doesn't seem right to you, that you stop, that you step back, that you evaluate, that you think with others, that you come to an understanding, and then you move forward. So that way, when you move forward, you're not just moving in a way to just move in and get it done, but that you've actually spent the time that you need to understand and to think forward so that it's most productive. The unconscious, the conscientious pause. So with that, I will pause here to allow my two amazing co-creators, my collaborators, my co-conspirators to introduce themselves. And I'm going to first throw it off to Rabbi Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Hajj. It's really an honor to be here. I'm Rabbi Jonathan Freirich, zooming in from Buffalo, New York with Voice Buffalo. And I, from the Haudenosaunee land, because we live on land that was that was originally someone else's. And one of the things that has led me to my why for being here tonight is that I feel so strongly that when we have these uncomfortable conversations, we are in a moment of great wonder, a moment of miraculous aha, that we get to encounter the mystery of one another in these moments, and that those moments lead us forward. And that as organizers, they are the moments that begin to build deeper bridges, better relationships, more vulnerability, more authenticity between us in a way that allows us to be fully present, more fully present with each other, and therefore more with one another as we go forward together. And I'm going to toss it to the absolutely amazing Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould.
Jonathan, you're just trying to get me to buy you something the next time I'm in Buffalo, but no. I am affectionately known as Dr. G. I currently serve on the amazing Faith Leadership Strategies team of Faith in Action as senior strategist. That's because they saw my hair turning gray right before their eyes and decided to make me a senior strategist. But I get to engage with amazing faith leaders, not just in the context of the yet to be United States, but also on the motherland, particularly in Ghana. I am an itinerant elder in the AME church. I'm here because my brothers invited me into this conversation. But no, I recognize in all of my conversations, not just with faith leaders, but I spend a lot of time with young people in multiple spaces. And people are waiting for us to have real conversations and not to have these kind of fraudulent, perfunctory, kumbaya kinds of conversations where we pretend that, like, as Hajj said, either we all believe the same thing, we agree. This work that we do is messy. It requires us to wrestle. As a theologian, I have been trained to wrestle with the sacred text and not just to amen, ashe, and I mean everything. And so I'm here with anticipation that we might not all see it the same way. But at the end of the day, because not even in spite of our differences, but because of our differences, that we are able to bring a different imagination, that we're able to bring a different skill set, and that we might move forward as a multi-faith, multiracial, gender equitable cohort of people moving forward toward justice. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Dr. G. And so Hajj, you and I had an uncomfortable conversation to start off this project. And I said a thing that we often say at Faith in Action. I say, well, we all agree that we are created in the divine image.
And I said, no, I don't believe it. Actually, I think I was much nicer than that. And I think I waited and then I said, Rabbi, just so you know, we don't all agree that we were created in the divine image. For Muslims, don't believe the divine has an image. And I think that that interchange set off what would become this series.
It certainly did. And the interesting thing about this, for me in particular, is, of course, like you, I am often, if not always, almost always, a minority faith representative in a setting that is not my own. And so I used the language that we use in Faith in Action, and it's not my language. And I was able to say, Hajj, you know, you're right. Because I don't believe that either. In fact, I went to the original text. And the original text on this, from a Jewish perspective, is this one. It is Genesis chapter 1, verse 22. Is everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Or 26, sorry. 126. It's highlighted here. And the text says, and God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu. Not in one word, but in two. In our image and in our likeness. And for those of you who don't know the way Jews read text, when something occurs that is unclear or happens twice, we say, that must mean something much different than what it says on the surface. And we've been arguing about what these two words mean for a long time. And one medieval scholar summed up a whole bunch of them. And I'm going to be mentioning this scholar a lot tonight. His name is Rabbi David Kimchi. And he said, you know, what are these attributes, these divine attributes that are ours, that are also like God? And medieval Jewish scholars and medieval Muslim scholars very much agreed that we don't know what God looks like. So this is not about physical appearance. So David Kimchi, in a very long dialogue where he talks about what angels are like and what demons are like and other things, says there are two particular things that make us like God. One of them is that we are able to make a difference in the world by what we do. Our actions have consequence. We can create or destroy. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we have the choice of what to do, which makes us different from a lot of other beings. You know, imagined angels and demons are what they are by their nature, but we get to choose. And this idea from the Middle Ages, I mean, this is not some, you know, radical Rabbi Jonathan 21st century 2023 reading. This is, you know, 800 years old in Jewish tradition, almost closer to 900 years old, is really something that turns out that I think Hajj and I were much more comfortable with than what we say all the time. And this is our model. Will we take the conscientious pause? Will we take the moment to be vulnerable and say, hey, you know, I'm not right with that. That's not what I believe. It's not what we believe. And what are we going to do with that? So we're going to have each other's mysteries in mind. Now, we've chosen a story that appears for all of us in 3 different texts. Is there anything else we want to do before we jump in, Hajj? I want to make sure we're good.
No, that's perfect. I can't wait to get into the meat of it, man.
Okay, so
and you know what, real quick, what I'm thinking, just to throw this out there, for those of you that are my age or older or maybe a little younger, it reminds me of Arsenio Hall, the things that make you go, right? Like, so.
That's right. Things that make you go home for exactly that. So we chose a story that occurs in all three of our traditions. It doesn't occur in a Buddhist or a Hindu tradition, and we're looking forward to engaging other partners as this hopefully becomes a series, so that it is not just an Abrahamic faith series. It is a absolutely, we have Sikh brethren and Hindus and Muslims and Baha'i and all the other people that are involved, and hopefully some indigenous peoples versions of spirituality as well. But this story is a key story. It's a story that Jews read every year and grapple with constantly. So this is the binding of Isaac, as it's known in our biblical tradition. We're going to look at the text, and I'm going to lead us through a Jewish version of understanding this text as a way of refamiliarizing us with the text and giving an interpretation. And then we're going to jump in with that Dr. Gould's take on it, and then Hajj is going to give us a Muslim take on it, which of course has different characters. The protagonists are different in the Quran. It's not Abraham and Isaac, but Ibrahim and Ishmael. So it should be hopefully interesting. To start us off, I'm going to share the text because this text is pretty interesting from a Jewish perspective. We don't like this text. We grapple with this text all the time because this is about human sacrifice. And it seems to be about Abraham agreeing to offer his son as an offering. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm a parent and I'm missing Abraham's argument here. So we're going to look at this text, and there are a variety of ways of reading it. So this is Genesis chapter 22, starting verse 1. If you're looking to see if anything happens interesting beforehand, nothing. It goes right into this text without preamble. The previous text is Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Boom, end of that story, new story. So it was after these things. I'm going to go between a translation of the Hebrew and the English that you've got here. And God tested Abraham, saying to him, Abraham. And Abraham answered, Hineni, here I am. And God said, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac. Now, this is a very strange thing from a Jewish perspective. Why did God repeat God's self so often, so much in this text? And we imagine that this is, in fact, part of the argument, because, of course, at this point, we've seen Abraham likes to argue with God, right? Abraham argued with God about whether or not to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and, bargained with God. But it seems strange that Abraham doesn't argue. So we interpret that this repetition is Abraham saying, okay, take my son. Which son? And your only one, or your favored one, depending upon the translation. And Abraham says, but they're both, I have two sons. And then the one you love, because it says the one you love before it says Isaac in the Hebrew. And Abraham says, God, what kind of person do you think I have? I have two sons, I love them both. And then finally God says Isaac. So we see that even our classical commentators are struggling to try to give Abraham more of a voice in this. Then come the instructions. Go to the land of Moriah, offer him there as a burnt offering. This is something we're going to come back to later. This is a strange one. It's take him up there for an offering. It doesn't necessarily say offer him. It could be something else, which is what I am going to offer. This idea that, in fact, Abraham doesn't hear this exactly, that he's missing the instructions. So offer him up, or make an offering with him on one of the mountains, which I'm going to show you. So Abraham gets up early in the morning. He saddles his donkey, and he takes two youths with him and Isaac, his son, and he splits the wood for the offering, and he gets up and goes out to the place which God will show him. By the way, side note here, Abraham does not talk to Sarah about this, because anybody here would know Sarah is not okay with this plan as it stands right now. So on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar, and Abraham says to the servants, stay here with the donkey, and the boy and I are going to go up there and we're going to worship. We're going to literally bow down, and then we are going to return to you. Now, this is strange, because if Abraham is actually planning to offer Isaac up, how come he says we here? Now, is Abraham lying? Well, we don't like to think of Abraham as somebody who lies. Abraham is a prophet and a patriarch, so it seems strange that he dissembles, although he has been known to stretch the truth in the past. So, but it seems strange. And here we see maybe Abraham is not so set upon this idea. Maybe there's something else going on. So verse 6, Abraham takes the wood for the burnt offering, and he puts it on his son Isaac, literally puts it on top of him. Here, son, carry this. And he takes in his hand the fire. It says just fire, not firestone, by the way, here. And so theoretically, it might be a torch, or it might be something to make fire with. And he takes the slaughter knife. This is not just a knife. This is a knife that eats. It's literally an eating knife, or a knife that makes for eating. And the two of them go on together. Now, this is suspicious. Even Isaac is raising a question here, because Isaac says, hey, Dad. And Abraham says, yes, my son. And Isaac says, well, we got the fire, we got the wood, but where's the sheep for the offering? And here, Abraham shows even a little bit more of a sense of things may not turn out the way maybe he kind of plans. Abraham says, God will see to the sheep for the offering, my son. And the two of them walk on together. Now, it turns out, exactly what happens. So what's going on here? They arrive at the place where God told him. Abraham built the altar there, laid out the wood, bound his son Isaac, and laid him in the altar on top of the wood. And then Abraham picks up the knife to slay his son. And then a messenger of God called to him from the heavens, saying, Abraham, Abraham, repeating it, making sure that God got Abraham's attention. And Abraham says the same word that he started out with, here I am. And God says, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, or you are in awe of God, a better translation from the Hebrew, since you have not withheld your son, your only one, from me. And then Abraham looks up, and his eyes fall upon a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named the place that site Adonai Yireh, Adonai, God appeared, where we now say on this mountain of God, there is an appearance of God. So I want us to think a little bit the way, I want us to hear a different reading of this. What happens if this test, because it is supposed to be a test, is not exactly a test of faith, but a test of listening? What happens if that original oriented piece at the beginning is Wajma asked if it's possible to have the text. I will give you the link to the text in the chat when I finish talking. What happens if Abraham just misheard? If God's test was, can you hear what I'm saying? Can you hear my instructions? My instructions are show your son how to make an offering. Teach your son the legacy of your people, which is not to sacrifice people. We don't have any sacrifice people tradition. Abraham doesn't come from people. There's no human sacrifice tradition that Abraham is bucking at this point. And then along the way, Abraham begins to get the idea. And then at the end, with the knife in his hand, we realize that Abraham is a somatic learner. He doesn't pick things up so much when he hears them. He needs to actually be there. Some of us are different types of learners, and he knows right there at that moment, because our medieval scholar does not interprets the entirety of God's appearances in Scripture as visions, not physical. This is a whole school of medieval scholarship that says all of these visions are in fact in the head of the prophet. The prophet is able to, they are not physical manifestations. So what happens if in that moment, Abraham pauses because of the wrongness of this action, and instead of going through with it, looks up and sees the ram and says, oh, God, you're right. I was meant to come up here and show my son how to do an offering because you've already provided for the ram up here. And then switcheroo, Abraham does what God intended all along. And this is an important reading for me as a rabbi and as a Jewish person, because I need to believe in a God that doesn't ask us to kill our kids as a show of faith. And with that, I'm going to give Dr. Gould the chance to tell us a different version of the story.
Thank you, Rabbi. And, you know, this is uncomfortable conversations. And so I will concur in some ways with Rabbi's rendition of this. The actual same words are that are there in this first book of his Torah are there in the Christian version of the Bible. But similar to this Jewish reading and understanding, I've always struggled with this text, right? I enter this conversation, obviously, as a Black woman. I don't have to even name that for you, as a descendant of those who had to sacrifice everything, had to sacrifice their country of origin, had to sacrifice their their mother tongue, their language, had to sacrifice their names, had to sacrifice their ancestors, their kindred, and their progeny. I enter that conversation, not just with that being the reality of my ancestors, but also being my reality in this alleged postmodern society in 2023. And so this is a text that traditionally in Christian church spaces that has been described merely as focusing on the ram in the bush, the low-hanging theological fruit that whenever there is a test, God always provides a ram in the bush. But I want to suggest to you that more is going on in this story than that, affirming much of which my colleague Rabbi has shared. From my perspective, this story is not just about a ram in the bush, but the formation of patriarchy that traffics in human flesh. Abraham, filicide, right? The act of a parent killing their own child. And there's this way in which one of the primary tenet of Christianity is about this sacrifice of a son. And so some would say that Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac is foreshadowing of the crucifixion. It is Christian justification of an immoral act, in my opinion, which brings many other immoral acts to mind: enslavement, incest, that we also find in the biblical text. I believe that it should cause us to question this moral philosophy that we often have around divine or so-called divine commandments. See, there were those who enslaved my ancestor who read the Bible and understood that they had some kind of divine command to actually oppress people. What kind of God requires the blood of children? And so for me, this is a text that early, even before I had theological imagination, or even understood or even had heard of the word theology as a child, this text literally left me trembling. Danish theologian Kierkegaard had a book called Fear and Trembling. And in that, he describes Abraham as a patriarch who was presented with a dilemma between his reason and his faith. Kierkegaard goes on to say that Abraham had to be fully aware that sacrificing his child was actually unethical, right? And if he were to discard faith, there would be no circumstances in which he would have entertained this idea of binding up his own son for a sacrifice. But he throws in this little faith thing. The writers, the human writers, the patriarchs, the old dead white men that wrote this, they say that Abraham does this because God actually asked him to do this, right? So Abraham has this contradictory instruction, is what Kierkegaard talks about. Abraham, in essence, did it for God. Did it for God? Did it for God? He had this sense of obligation to God. But I want to suggest to you, the way I read the text, particularly from my social location, is that Abraham really did this thing for himself. And it is how patriarchy continues to be perpetuated, not just in a sacred text, but in our religious institutions, in the nonprofit industrial complex, in politics, in education, and in the world. I asked myself this, even as a young person, I'm like, where is his mama, right? Where in the world is Sarah? And for those of you who might not be familiar with the text, if you don't have to have a Bible, you can just Google and go to Genesis 23. Almost immediately, at least the way the text is written, Sarah just drops dead. Sarah's just dead. She doesn't get sick. And if she does, it's in the white spaces of our imagination. We don't get to know what happened to her. One Jewish scholar describes it as her soul fled from her body upon hearing the news of the fact that her husband that she has already done almost anything for, has decided that he would actually sacrifice her only child. The late Phyllis Tribble said, her absence from the narrative and by her absence from this narrative and her subsequent death, Sarah has been sacrificed by patriarchy to patriarchy. By patriarchy to patriarchy. So the things we know about Abraham, and yes, you got these three of us on here who are shaped by these Abrahamic traditions. We know Rabbi was like kind. He's like, yeah, he stretches the truth. Abraham lies, right? Abraham is not afraid to actually kind of go toe-to-toe and negotiate with God. If he negotiates in this text, we don't get to bear witness of that. Sarah, like women most often are, Sarah at least has a name in the Bible, but Sarah, like women most often are, is disappeared by the text. Sarah, who is like really concerned about Isaac, we know that, right? Because Sarah decided that she would basically oust the son that she helped Abraham have with Hagar. So we also know that Abraham has a history of sacrificing his children. He sacrificed his first child, even though, yeah, we read the text and God was like, yeah, but that's not going to be the favorite one. And I didn't basically tell you to go have that one. He literally sends his this child and his mother off basically with a Subway sandwich and 2 bottles of water. Go and be well in the desert. God has to intervene then, and seemingly now God intervenes. Patriarchy and sacrifice throughout the history of humankind and throughout the history of human oppression seemingly has only been dealt with when God intervenes. For me, this text should have us to question how we are actually engaging with each other when these kinds of sacrifices, these same kind of sacrifices, right, are made today. Little Black boys and little Black girls still are being bound, not by their parents, but by others who decided that their position in the world means more than a vulnerable life of children. They've composed with the nurturing and support of religion, this hierarchy of humanity. But at the same time, as a Black woman in America, a Black woman of faith, long before I ever imagined preaching, my faith tells me when all else fails, when I can't count on patriarchs from anywhere because they've all proven to be dangerous to my existence, that I have to tap into something and I have to believe in a God who will provide, that I have to believe that God will be a ram in the bush when it comes to the wage gap. See, I got to work until like August the 12th every year. I think now it actually moved to September to earn the same money that male colleagues earn, particularly white male colleagues. I have to believe that God will be a ram in the bush. Womanist Dolores Williams says, the secret to tapping into resilience, strength, and resistance is hearing the promise of God and believing it. She says that's why we keep going back to church, even if it's online these days, or at least one of the reasons to hear the promises of unconditional love or of forgiveness, and even when we feel hopeless, inadequate, of the possibilities of transformation and the promise that the arc of history is bending toward justice as we follow the path of faith. So for me, while this text terrified me as a child, this text also reminds me to keep working for justice, because at some point, God will provide a ram in the bush that will actually disrupt the death that patriarchy continues to try and deal. That's how I understand this text. It is an uncomfortable text and makes for a lot of uncomfortable conversation. Hajj.
Well, I don't know why I've done that to myself again, to put myself after Dr. Gould, because it's not a fair situation to be in. So tonight is called Uncomfortable Conversations. And I think this is going to be an expose of what that looks like, particularly because I have a very different take on history, what it means, and the way we are supposed to look at it. I just want to mark my time. So first of all, I want to share as well that before I ever thought to examine the text deeply, just the story itself, the idea that there's a story that is found in the Holy Quran that tells us that God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, that makes you stop. It makes you think, right? It takes a whole bunch of otherness. It takes a whole bunch of, what did Dr. Gould, you talked about that faith. It takes a whole bunch of faith to even want to continue to read into that story and to think how it affects us today. So first of all, let me share that while I have a similar story in the Islamic tradition, mine is very different. So let me share the text that first speaks of the sacrifice in the Holy Quran. This is in the 37th chapter, and I'm going to use from 100 to 113. So the Quran, it had talked about Abraham in previous verses and different trials and struggles he had been through. And then Abraham calls out, "Oh my Lord, grant me a righteous son." So we gave him the good news of a forbearing son. The word forbearing here is important because it will be one of the words that is used to differentiate between Isaac and Ishmael, or Ishaq and Ismail in the Quran. Then when the son reached the age of serious work with him, he said, "Oh my son, I've seen a vision that I offer you in sacrifice. Now see what is in your view." And the son that we perceive to be Ishmael, Ismail, said, "Oh my father, do as you are commanded, and you will find me, if God so wills, one of the steadfast." So first, God describes him as forbearing, and he describes himself as steadfast. And throughout the Quran, Ismail is equated with patience and forbearance. So when they had both submitted to God, and the reason I stop on both is because for me, this helps massage out the we. Rabbi Jonathan, when you were talking about the we, why does it say we, right? It's not Abraham doing a thing. And in our story, it's both of them. It's Abraham submitting to the will of God, and it's Ismail submitting to the will of God. So it says, when they had both submitted to God, and he laid him prostrate on his forehead for sacrifice, we called out to him, "O Abraham, you have fulfilled the vision. Thus, indeed, do we reward those who do right. For this was a clear trial. And we ransomed him with a momentous sacrifice. And we left for him among generations to come in later times peace and salutations to Abraham. Thus, indeed, we do reward those who do right, for he was of the believing servants." I gotta move this over so I can go down. And then in verse 112, it's interesting here because we're going to use this later. It said, "Now after this had happened, and we gave him the good news of Isaac, a prophet, one of the righteous. We blessed him and Isaac, but of their progeny, some are those that do right, and others that do wrong to themselves." So this is the text that we have, as well as small mentions here or there throughout the Quran, and many mentions in the tafsir, or the interpretations of the Quran, and the hadith, which is the literature that documents the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So as we work through this, a few items of disagreement with my sister and my brother, my siblings in faith. First of all, for Muslims, for us to understand the text, we have some certain ideas about the characters in the text, and some ideas about their very nature. So for Muslims, in a very bold and strong way, we believe that the prophets are sinless, which means we would say they don't lie, they don't do something wrong, they don't do anything conniving or evil. Everything that they do is an act which would be deemed ethical because it was deemed by God. And God would not deem something unethical. But then you go back and you say, well, why was he asked to sacrifice his son? And one more thing before we get to sacrificing his son, as you may have seen that I've shared already, that for Muslims, the sacrifice is of the eldest son, and even what we would say the only son of the time, and that was the son Ishmael. And I know that that's an interesting thing. Somehow Ishmael doesn't get the love he deserves in history, and neither does his mother Hajar or Hagar. And connecting to race and patriarchy, Dr. Gould, the reality is that Hajar was of African descent. She was a black woman. So two things. One, we believe that possibly she was kept from us in history or seen as some sort of servant, because the way that we wanted to understand the dynamics between lighter skinned folks and darker skinned folks. But also we think about the reality, or as we are given in a biblical or Quranic reality, the idea that Isaac becomes the lineal forefather of our Jewish siblings, and then all the way down, obviously, until Jesus, who would come from that line, and the Arab prophets, the darker skinned folks, would come through the descent of Ishmael or Ismail. So there's an idea about, because of race, who might be worthy, who might be honored, who might be thought of as valuable. So that comes in the beginning. Now you have the sacrifice. Abraham, after reaching a ripe old age of 80 something, and we don't know exactly what, after having not have been able to have a child with his first wife, Sarah, God allows, and Sarah allows him to take on another wife, Hajar, and in that marriage he is honored with a child. Now this man, who had accomplished much in life, he was honored, he was respected, revered, and the one thing that he asked for, according to the Quran, is, "Oh my Lord, grant me a progeny, grant me somebody, grant me a son." And God gives him this son. And not many years later, God then says, "Hey, now that I gave you that son, and you've come to love that son, I want you to take that son and offer him as a sacrifice." We don't have any scripture that, or even later traditions that say that maybe he had misheard Rabbi, or maybe he didn't understand, or maybe he had made a mistake. We believe that God tried Abraham. As good as Abraham was, this is one of the first lessons we have in the story, that as good as he was, God would still test him, because it's a continual test in this life. And the Quran says many times that your sons and your daughters, your children, are a test. Like, we love them, we take care of them, they're our pride, our joy, they're our everything, but the Quran says they're a test. How will you react? How will you act? Will you act the way that you're supposed to? Will you remain attached to God and according to what God wants from you? So he takes, and as he's about to sacrifice, he sees the ram, and they're saved. On a side note, because it was mentioned by Dr. Gould, the second sacrifice of Abraham and Ishmael is that Abraham is told by Sarah to take Hajar and Ishmael out to the desert, out of her home. And he does so because he also, in doing so, believes he is fulfilling something that God has asked. And again, he makes a prayer, make them a righteous, mighty nation. And it was in that desert that comes the line and what would be later known as Mecca. So a great history of who the Muslims became and the generations prior to us came because of that great sacrifice of Abraham, of Hajar, and Ishmael. So it's three of them that experienced that sacrifice. With all of that said, the reality is that the Holy Quran is not a book of history. It doesn't follow a historic line. It doesn't follow a chain of events or a time. The Quran is a book of giving us guidance. That's what it calls itself, a book of guidance. It's a book of ethical realities for us to have guidance and a kind of a roadmap of how to live in this world. So for me, the question is not, why did Abraham do it? Because that could get me in a whole bunch of circles. The question is not, why did Ishmael do it? Not why did Hajar do it? Because all of those are powerful stories in of them themselves. But what does it mean for me today? What does it mean for me right now in 2023? about a half a century ago, an author named Dr. Ali Shariati, he talked about the performance of Hajj, this pilgrimage that Muslims must make once in their life. And right now we're in the season of Hajj. So those who have gone and embarked on Hajj are in Mecca right now so that they can fulfill the actions of Abraham, Hajar, and Ishmael. So while they're there, one of the realities is that one of the practices is that we go to the places where we believe the sacrifice had gone to take place, and what we do is we throw some stones at what was a pillar and now is a wall, to say that we're throwing out the accursed devil from away from us, so that we can focus on what God asks of us. Dr. Ali Shariati, when he's talking about Hajj, he's talking not just about the physical action we do, what it means to us right now. And he talks about the sacrifice of Abraham and Ishmael, the we, right? Not the I or not the one, the we, Abraham and Ishmael. And he talks about us. And he says the real lesson and story of this is, what is getting in the way of you and your focus to God? Is it your own children even? What if your children are taking you away from doing the right thing? Is it your money? Is it your position? Is it the letters after your name or the letters before your name? Is it your position of authority? Is it your pulpit? Is it your political power? Is it your education? What is it that is getting in the way of you and your relationship with God? And then Dr. Shariati challenges us. Abraham was willing to go through with a sacrifice of his own beloved son because he saw in that he was sacrificing the most beloved of this world to him. That might be a barrier between him and his relationship to God. So Dr. Shariati says, you don't have to sacrifice your son, but what will you sacrifice? He asks us the question, who is your Ismail? Who is it? Is white supremacy your Ismail? Is religious superiority your Ismail? Is your position your Ismail? Who is your Ismail? And are you willing to sacrifice it when it comes before and between the relationship between you and God? And for our purposes together as people of faith, trying to move that needle of justice, or noodle of justice, however you want to look at it. When you're thinking about that, it's not just thinking about what will I sacrifice that's getting in my relationship. Part of my relationship with God is what I'm willing to do for the rest of the people around me. What am I willing to do for immigrant sisters and brothers that don't have documentation or who are seen as second-class citizens? What am I going to do about the Black bodies that are victims of state-centered violence and policing? What am I going to do about those that are locked behind cages and bars because of the way we see? What am I going to do about the least from amongst us? What am I going to do? And what of myself is getting in the way? Because if what's getting in the way is I don't have time, or what's getting in the way is you're not worthy of me, or what's getting in the way is that's not what I care about, that means that I'm losing and I'm missing out on the great, great blessing of living into the sacrifice that God is calling me to do, just as he called my forefather Abraham to do of his own son.
Wow. Yasher Koach, Hajj, which is a Jewish way of saying awesome. Go forward in strength. Great teaching. So points of discomfort. I think, Dr. Gould, you led us in this conversation by saying this text, on its face value, I'm going to say no. I'm saying no to this text on its face value. And there's a Jewish tension in that, right? So I get to feel a tension of, wait a second, who are you to say no to my text? Even as I'm saying no to it as well. Because there's a Jewish style of questioning the text that says, okay, the text is perfect. Even if the people, and just hear the difference there. Hajj made the claim, I'm not going to question those people, right? This was another one of our initial discomforts was, I can't say Abraham messed up. I can't say Abraham lied. I can't say, Abraham is, and there is a Jewish tradition in that vein as well. There's a Jewish tradition that elevates our ancestors to unbelievable heights of righteousness. You know, the stories that rabbis tell about King David, who is, let's on the surface of the text, kind of a thug. Let's be clear. But in the image of the rabbis turn him into another rabbi, a scholar who sets a harp in his palace that will pick up the sound of the north wind and wake him up should he fall asleep at midnight so he can pray at midnight and learn more. This is David in the rabbinic text. So we've got this tension. Who are we to question one another's text? Right? Even when I question it myself. And I think the three learnings we've got here, right? Dr. Gould's deep, profound sense of this is, if we don't focus on a teaching here, we're going to allow this to be a teaching of patriarchy. We're going to allow this to be a text used against us. We can't abide that. And then Hajj, this is a text about what are we willing to give up? Can I give up my comfort to get along better with my sisters and brothers? Will I sacrifice the things that I'm attached to for the sake of going out and doing something in a place that I don't normally go to? Will I stand and walk with people I care about? And then at the heart of the organizing, the teaching that I brought, will I listen past my first impression? Will I find the righteous thing, even if it makes me uncomfortable? What do you guys think? Your thoughts, your reactions.
There are, I see in the chat, I'm looking at what Denny
Yes.
really powerful. And while we're waiting for people, if you have questions, comments, or whatever, you can feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. And yeah, wow. Sorry for your loss as well, Denny. But just wanting to name, right? Like, I never got permission to wrestle with the text, right? That wasn't I was fortunate as a child, literally as a child, to have a pastor in my missionary Baptist church who was not theologically trained, but always gave me space to ask the questions that made my mother more uncomfortable than I think they made him. She's like, and here we go again. But I never got permission. And I remember the first time I told my parishioners, you can question God, you're in relationship with God, and you can question the text. And so no one ever told me, it's not in my tradition. It's like, hey, this is not true, right? Because, as a child, particularly in a Baptist context, I was taught that the Bible was the inerrant word of God. I don't know anybody else on here that has that same experience. And I grew to understand that God didn't actually write it, though. So God might be inerrant, but the people of God are not so much, and we're taught that, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And, I've reclaimed that and added in a few of my own names because I didn't actually know them. I just know what the patriarchs told me about them. But was it not also the God of Hagar and Sarai, right? So questions, comment. Thank you, Denny, and for sharing. And may the sacred memory of your grandson forever live. I know somebody has something to say on here.
Yeah, and everyone, I turned your videos off, but you can turn them on or raise your hand or just talk. Nobody is, everybody's empowered to speak. And Hajj, do you have any other reactions?
No, I'm excited to hear what people are going to bring to us. And again, Denny, that your story is powerful in the way that you use it to think about what we have to do. And I mean, if you want to jump in, even. Look at this.
Wajma said, I just wanted to add to Rabbi's talk about us as an image of God. Go ahead.
Well, come on, get off mute. Talk to us.
Salam, everyone. I am a Muslim. I'm just a community member trying to learn more, and I've always been interested in interfaith talks. So I just wanted to add to Rabbi's talk about us humans as an image of God. I think Brother Reza clarified that in Islam, there is no such thing as God's image, but what we are like God. Most importantly, God has many attributes that we find in humans that are reflected in humans, like mercy, forgiveness, love, kindness. On top of that, in Islam, there is an interpretation that we humans tend to look for justice on top of everything else, on top of all other creations. We have that capability to use our minds and our intellects and look for justice. So that's number one thing that makes us like God and in the image of God is our ability to look for justice. So my only suggestion is that these talks can be continued. I love them and I will participate. And I hope this brings justice to many of us in the world. And these books cannot be used against each other and against us. In other ways, we can just in a different way, we can use them to bring justice to the world and to each other, inshallah. That's all.
Inshallah.
Thank you for the time.
Oh, thank you, Washma, for your observation. And I couldn't be more illuminated by the idea that you're right, that that the attributes of the divine are ones that we emulate.
So you guys got to hear us for an hour. This means this is your time to jump off mute and engage with us. It's late.
Yeah. We welcome different perspectives, pushback, affirmations, just anything. We just love to be in discourse with you.
Yes, Reverend Carolyn.
Well, I can't help but keep on smiling with each of you sharing a message, really. These are all preachable sermons, I will say. They work, but you each approached it from a different perspective, which I really appreciated. And Dr. Gould, I love you for bringing in that place of the wrestling, but questioning how can you absolutely not sacrifice a child. But I think that came across with all of you. But I love the different nuances that you brought. My grandmother was a big one on talking about Hagar. So to bring that forth was very powerful for me. And so I don't have anything specific, but in general, thank you. I love the analysis, but also the fact that we can look at these differently. We can approach them differently and still get value out of the conversation.
Thank you, Reverend
Thank you.
Carolyn. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And Reverend Marilyn, did you want to say something?
I think it was because she just jumped back on, so the
Okay.
was not there, but she's definitely welcome. We hope to continue with these things that make you go, or these uncomfortable conversations or these aha moments. The reality is that if we don't know about these differences, then we're constantly going to be in spaces where people think we all agree. We are all going to agree that prophets means whatever we think. No, we don't. But if we don't have these spaces to really talk them out, it's going to be really hard for us to create the space we want. And one of the beautiful attributes of God that we possess is an ability to create. Maybe we don't create ex nihilo like he does, but we create. We get to create space. We get to create thought. We get to create action. And that's what it's all about, is creating a space where we belong and creating a space where we don't have to wear a mask, that we get to be everything that makes us us, that we don't have to pretend like, yeah, okay, and just not say anything because we don't want to shake the boat. Maybe it's time we start shaking the boat with each other in a beautiful way. Hey, Rabbi Jonathan, I don't agree. Dr. Gould, I don't agree. But it's okay, because at the end of the day, none of us want to see another George Floyd. None of us want to see another line at the border of people that are getting murdered just trying to come to a safe haven. None of us want to see more people locked in cages. None of us want to see more hungry people. None of us want to see people that don't have access to healthcare. But we do want to see a place that at least when we gather, we have a language that we use. Rabbi Jonathan, you still should stand in a space and say we're created in the image of God. And Dr. Gould, you still should do that. We just should know that it's not something we all believe in. And it's okay. And
Yeah.
Jim got his hand up.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
What I want to say is I joined this because I got a notice from my best friend Hajj Reza that this would be a chance for us to have something, and I'd see some of his colleagues. I didn't know what it would be about, and I didn't know we'd be looking at a text that I know from my own faith, but also after 15 years of almost every Saturday morning being in dialogue with a group of Jewish people and some Christians who take the reading of that week, the Parsha, and break it open in complete honesty with those in the conversation. For the last 3 years, of course, we've done it on Zoom, but before that, for at least 15 years, we'd be at the temple in the library, and whatever text it was we were supposed to reflect on, we prepped for it, and then we shared our understanding, linguistic, theological, sociological, political, as long as it wasn't divisive, as long as it wasn't with an edge to it that meant to be a debate over something. That's why we can do this for all those years. And that Saturday morning from 9 to 10:15 is a wonderful time for me. It's maybe the best time all week. Today was wonderful for me to hear a different voice, the Muslim voice. That's what we don't have in our dialogue on Saturday mornings at the temple. Reza, it was wonderful hearing you. It was wonderful meeting Dr. Gould and Rabbi Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Let me just share with everybody, because he's too humble to say, but Jim Grant is the retired Czech. He has a Star Wars title, Director of Social Justice for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fresno. In addition, he has been for years the chair of the Interfaith Scholar Weekend with the Interfaith Alliance, the Human Rights Coalition, the Clergy Caucus, with Faith in the Valley. So he's extremely engaged. And for many years, he was the host of a television show called Forum for a Better Understanding, where these kind of conversations would take place.
Thank you, Reza.
Thank you, Jim. Dr. Gould, I saw you make have an expression with regard to as long as it's not divisive.
There you go. Uncomfortable conversations.
Uncomfortable conversations. Yeah, Jim, that sat with me in a particular way. No judgment. But I think part of what we kind of inherently vow to do in these uncomfortable conversations, so certainly we don't want to be intentionally divisive, but really agreeing to disagree, right? And I think sometimes we get further if we can literally wrestle together and kind of name that, like, hey, I got a whole, now we were, still closely aligned on this text in so many ways, even with our different understandings of it. But there are a lot of things that it's like, yeah, no, that's not what, I won't ever believe that. And still being able to show up next Saturday, right? And to discuss that. So yeah, thanks, Rabbi, for calling me out. I did have a reaction to when you said, as long as it's not divisive. I'm like, well, what if it just happens to be and you didn't plan on that? So
Calling you in.
Maybe a quick nuance on that. Take, for example, Israel, the country. We don't talk about it because we know that there would be among us both people from Temple Beth Israel and the other members, professors, religious leaders, whatever, could be very, perhaps some of us pro-Palestinian, doesn't come up. The idea of grappling with the text, and that's the thing, we stay on the text. So in that sense, it does help us that we're dealing with a text. And it doesn't mean we don't disagree in public. We disagree with someone's interpretation. We do. We just don't, dig in and make it become about, well, I really don't, we don't spend time in the disagreement. We might disagree and move on. So it's a little bit different than, being all nice.
So
We
Jim-
have different opinions.
Jim, I'm going to push back on Dr. Gould's behalf here.
Hey, step up, you patriarchal man.
Never have to do that ever.
No, I know, but so there's a distinction between the idyllic Torah study on Saturday morning that you're talking about and what we're asking for as organizers.
Yep.
Because when I pushed back with Dr. Gould, I did what we technically call agitation. Like I see you here, and I see you've got something to say. I want to hear it, and we don't have time anymore for polite conversation. The world, I mean, I don't know about you, but you live in California, and I used to live in Tahoe, and we were directly impacted by fires when the state was on fire. And finally, we in New York got a taste of what it's like when the world is on fire this year. But the world is not just actually burning, it's metaphorically burning. And, like people in a slightly different culture than mine say, we don't got time for that. We need to have that conversation about Israel if it's getting in the way of us working together. Because, if somebody's going to be worried about working with me because they feel like I claim I'm a Zionist and therefore I'm okay with Palestinians dying on behalf of the country of Israel, then we need to have a conversation, because if that's going to prevent us from standing up together for injustice in this country, we need to get over it. We need to find out. And I think that's part of what we're calling for here, which is, how do we get at that? Some of that we get at because we come from these different faith traditions, and we don't want to not accept, we don't want to have people not grapple with the discomfort together when somebody says we all believe X, Y, or Z.
Hey, by the way, Rabbi Jonathan, I just got to throw this at you because I got an email today. The temple where Jim is talking about having, that's Rabbi Rick Weiner, who sends his regards to you. He apologized he won't be with you today.
So yeah, we've got a lot of people in common, but I think, our goal is someday we should all be able to study text in peace together, but we're not there yet because there's a lot of peace not found.
Thank you, Rabbi, and you never have to speak for me, so you were really speaking for yourself. But we are organizers, and we often talk about getting in a fight together, and that fight together is against, but sometimes it's also like with each other, so that we come to a common understanding. I see my son is actually on. Of course, he got on late, but he used to actually work for me in organizing. We were doing on a C4 side, prepping people for a prosecutor race. And there were Black congregations who really understood what was at stake, and he really led the efforts with white congregations to help them understand a different perspective, because they'd had a different experience, and it was a situation where it could have been totally divisive, but being able to sit in the tension. And I think to Rabbi's point, there's so much at stake, right? Rabbi's in Buffalo. He's in Buffalo. right? Where 10 Black people were shot down, right? And that's a common story. Many of you on here might be in places that has happened. This past week was the anniversary of, the sad anniversary of 9 AME siblings being killed, as well as the Pulse nightclub shooting. And so because of all of those things, because like literally life and blood, right? These are life and death situations. So it requires us to sit in the messiness, to be uncomfortable with each other, to be agitated by each other, and show up again tomorrow to fight toward the injustices. So I'm really grateful to Hajj and Rabbi for inviting me into this space with them as we just try to help people, give people permission to ask the questions, to grapple, to be uncomfortable. Maybe even be, you can be mad. My parents would say, just as long as you don't wake up mad in the morning, it's okay. It's like we're still all siblings, and we gotta be in this thing together. So yeah. Any other last words as we close out our time?
Ooh, Matthew puts forward, thank you to all three of us. In the Armenian Orthodox tradition, the phrase created in his image refers to our minds and our freedom of choice, i.e. our free will or self-determination. The phrase in the likeness of God refers to our potential for our fulfillment of God-likeness through our exercise of personal choices and creative abilities. Amen. So to bring us home, as it were, Reza started us off with this idea coming from Martin Buber, this all life is encounter. And I'm going to offer the blessing of being in the same space together, that when we engage authentically with each other, we take a place and turn it into the place to be. And I use that word specifically because the place, hamakom in Hebrew, is another way of saying God. And that place can even be a Zoom place. It can be any place where we encounter each other with authenticity, with vulnerability, accepting that there's going to be discomfort, because if it's real, we're not going to be comfortable. We're going to have to encounter difference and celebrate it and figure it out and grapple with each other. So thank you all for really, as Dr. Gould said, for showing up, truly for showing up and bringing our faces together in this space. And we will let you know, we're going to attempt to do this every 3 months-ish. So look for it around the High Holy Days in September, in the Jewish High Holy Days, because mid-September. So we'll figure it out there, and we will try to do it between Thanksgiving and Christmas. God bless everybody.
God bless.
Thank you all.
Happy Eid, Reza.
Yeah,
Thanks,
happy
JG.
Eid.
Thanks, Dr. Gould.
Blessings.
I'm taking the day off next Wednesday, so use one of my roving holidays.
That's right. I don't blame you.
All right. And let's figure out what we have to sacrifice.